1% Bitcoin allocation is all you need. And just to narrow down, just that we can go into that in a second, but you've made the point that what the average entity, so commercial entity, will own in the future for Bitcoin in today's dollar terms, based on the distributions today, is $14.81 worth of Bitcoin in today's terms. Do you want to just, it sounds a bit insane. Do you just want to, riff on that?
Let me run through that real quick for the people that haven't read the thread. However, not to toot my own horn, but I really encourage you to read it because the math is, frankly, it's devastating. It's really optimistic if you're within Bitcoin. If you're not within Bitcoin, it's devastating. And here's why. Hal Finney in 2009 predicted that Bitcoin would eventually become the world's monetary stock, or at least has a high chance of doing so. And, if it were to do that, the global wealth in terms of Bitcoin would continue to climb forever. Well, the first chart I put in my thread is that exact chart. He predicted that the first week of Bitcoin's existence back in 2009, Bitcoin would not cross $1 until 2011. So 2 whole years before Bitcoin crossed $1, Hal Finney predicted this would happen. Okay, the last 14 years, Bitcoin has done nothing but do that. Continually, in a volatile fashion, the global wealth in terms of Bitcoin is declining. Okay, what does that mean? Bitcoin is eating everything else. It is eating monetization and every other asset. Granted, right now, it's very small, but it's been doing it for over a decade and a half now, basically. And so in my thread, I say, okay, what if this continues to be right? What if the trend continues? And Bitcoin eventually becomes the global monetary stock of the human race and eats monetary premium and everything. Okay, what if that happens? And we distribute this monetary stock in all the entities of the human race. And by entities, I mean humans. Okay, in my calculation, I put in 5.36 billion adults because that's roughly what there are today. Maybe there's 5.5 billion, maybe there's 5 billion, depending on your definition, but there's roughly 5 billion adults. I put in 5.36 billion. Okay, then you have countries. Okay. You have the balance sheets of nation states, and then you have corporations. So I believe in my sum total, I have like 5.4 billion, 5.5 billion entities that I say, okay, if we add up humans, companies, countries, 5.5 billion or so. Because, there's millions of companies and tens of thousands of large companies and 1,000 mega corporations. But okay, we put all this together and let's apply a typical Pareto distribution to it. So current wealth distribution. Okay. Again, I got a lot of flack for it because, you're too optimistic. You're making assumptions that don't make sense. It's like, no, I'm not. Current wealth distribution with the current trend of Bitcoin eating monetary stock. Do the math. I did in my thread. Go look at it. Go read it, please. And just like you said, the average distribution is today $14 worth of Bitcoin. It's completely nuts. Like, I'm too late to Bitcoin. I'll never own a whole Bitcoin. It's like, there's only 21 million of them. Like, by definition, there can only be 21 entities that own one Bitcoin. It's like, you in the future will not own a full Bitcoin, most likely. Today you actually have the chance to, but in the future you won't. In fact, you probably won't even know anyone that owns a whole Bitcoin, like statistically speaking. And statistically speaking, you may not even know anyone that owns a tenth of a Bitcoin, because there's only 210 million people who can own a tenth of a Bitcoin. You do the math, you look at my thread, and you see quickly that, when you do this out, that the vast, it's, I'm at a loss for words, frankly. It's so, the main point of the thread being that we are so late in terms of our timeline. We're already 14 years into this exponential trend. For everything, like I said, take the internet. The internet took 30 years to be globally adopted. Bitcoin's already 14 years through its adoption, and it's being adopted 80% faster than the internet. It's like, okay, we're halfway through a timeline if we assume this is happening at the same speed as the internet, and it's not happening at the same speed as the internet. It's happening faster. It's like, okay, our timeline is really short here, and all it takes is like $50 or $100 or $1,000 of Bitcoin for the average person. It's like, that's all it takes. We are at the perfect time where the risk is low enough because it's clear that Bitcoin's a dominant proof of work consensus protocol in history. It's like, there's no second best proof of work system. It's just Bitcoin. So it's like, okay, the risk is so low, and yet the probability of it continuing to survive is so high. Its hash rate just made new all-time highs like 2 days ago, even though its price is down 70-80%. It's more secure and more anti-fragile than ever. It's like, the whole point of the thread is that we are at the very tail end of the early period of Bitcoin. And inherently, for us to go from the end of the early period to full adoption, it's like our human brains are not ready for the implications of that on the exchange rate between Bitcoin and the US dollar. It's like people aren't ready. It's like the only logical conclusion is that this happens. If adoption continues at the rate it's been going at for 14 years, even if it slows down, it's almost terrifying. Let me put it this way, and I don't say this in my thread, so let me put it this way. There's 2 million Bitcoin available on exchanges left. Okay, 2 million. All right, so obviously exchange rate's roughly $20,000. Okay, what is that? 20 billion for 20 to $40 billion of it was what it would take to buy all of the Bitcoin left. Okay. What if a central bank in the world decides, we're going to print $100 billion and just buy them all? It's like $100 billion. Like, that's a lot of money for me, but it's like, that is so little. It's like, okay. What if Elon Musk says, I want a 10% allocation. I want to sell 10% of my Tesla stock or 10% of my SpaceX shares or whatever, and I'm just going to soak up all the Bitcoin. Okay, and this is already happening. Take Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor, one of the gigachads of the space, to use the term of the meme, one of the biggest Bitcoin bulls out there. He is one CEO of a relatively small corporation. He has bought 1% of the entire Bitcoin supply for the entirety of the human race. One guy, chairman of his company. He took $4 billion, between selling stock and raising capital and, his own money too. And he bought 1%, and they're gone. He's never selling. He's made it very clear he's never selling. It's, people aren't ready. It's like every other asset we've had in human history. If the supply is soaked up and the price inflects upwards, what do people do? The incentive to produce more goes up. If I buy all the gold and I shoot the price of gold up, what happens? People go out and they mine more gold because there's an incentive to. Okay, take housing, like real estate where I'm in. The price of housing has shot up. What's happening? People are building houses like crazy because inventory is so small, and the financial incentive to create more supply has skyrocketed up literally along with the price. Okay, but Bitcoin, again, because it's a closed system, that's not what happens. If you soak up all the supply and people still want supply that's not there, the price does nothing but continue to go up until somebody is willing to sell. And we've seen that on very small instances. You hear about how this asset or that asset, skyrocketed up 10x in the matter of a few hours or whatever. It's like, okay, all that happens is because there's no more supply and somebody has to cover their shorts, their longs or something, like we see all the time. Or in the inverse case, we saw that with oil back in the lockdowns of 2020, where oil actually went negative. We see it all the time in minutia events where it's like, oh, wow, that was a freak coincidence where there was no more supply and everybody wanted it. And people just kept bidding up the price continuously until somebody was willing to sell. It's like, okay, what happens when you have corporations, nation states, and individuals all trying to buy the remaining supply and none of them want to sell? It's like, okay, Bitcoin's infinitely divisible. You have demand from numerous assets and from companies that can issue more and more stock, and from countries that can issue more and more political currency units indefinitely for an infinitely smaller portion of the closed monetary network. It's like, I might sound a little crazed here, but I encourage you to think about this. If you're listening to this, you don't understand what I'm saying it. It's like there's no limit to how much money that can be printed to buy this. There's only 2 million left. If there are 64 million millionaires in the world, okay, if 1 in 30 of them say, I want 1 Bitcoin, they're all gone. All of them. 1 in 30 millionaires say, I want a 2% allocation of Bitcoin. They're all gone. $20,000 is 2% of a million. Okay, the math just gets absurd. And the reason why there is such high pressure here, and one of the reasons why I'm afraid this is going to be very soon, is because for the first time we have a continued decrease in supply of Bitcoin on exchanges. Until March of 2020, the available supply in exchanges did nothing but go up. But since then, it's only gone down, and now there's only 2 million left. And so it's almost terrifying to me. What if the next 3 years or next 5 years continues this trend, and the number of available Bitcoins on the market continue to go down at the current rate? I mean, what's happening is that the total stock of Bitcoin left is being sucked out while liquidity increases on the network. That's a recipe for disaster. If you're not in Bitcoin, you'll be on a sinking ship that's declining exponentially, while the ship that is floating has an exponential number of people flocking to it. And eventually it's never too late to get on a ship that's not sinking, but that whole game theory here is just disastrous for every asset that's not Bitcoin. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent again, but it's just the point of my thread is people don't understand how quickly this could happen, because a technology curve is already fast enough. And when you add on top of that extreme financial stakes and the ability of the former system and the dying system to create exponential number of units within that system to fund the transition into the new system, it's like this is going to be the fastest paradigm shift in human history, and it's almost certain. Bitcoin's already the most secure computer network in the world. It's like for you to assume this is not going to happen is for you to assume that the most secure computer network on the face of the planet is going to die. It's like literally before that happens, we would have somebody hack the nuclear codes and have a nuclear war. It's like, anyway, the risk is so high and the probability is so uncomfortably high. So
I'm glad you're taking Bitcoin seriously. You all should be taking your self-custody seriously. Where are you storing your seed phrase? Is it on a piece of paper? Is it on a sticky note? Or are you doing the right thing and putting it on a metal plate? My friends over at SteedStamp are sponsoring part of this video, and on their behalf, I'm here to tell you that they have a really good product for stamping your seed phrase on a durable piece of metal that you can keep over the long term. This prevents against your seed phrase getting lost due to water damage, fire damage, and frankly, it makes it a little more weighty and makes it a little more difficult to lose track of, and it's better psychologically for peace of mind with having it on something that you know is not just going to last as long as a piece of paper, but it's going to last indefinitely. So if your Bitcoin time horizon is for the long term and your time horizon for your seed phrase is for the long term, I highly encourage you check out Stamp Seed with their high quality experience in having Bitcoin seed plates for you. So go to the website. You can use my discount code in the description, where you can get a discount off of your order of Stamp seed plates. So it's a great company. You can get a great discount. Check out the link in the description and you can get your seed plate today. Thanks.